Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk. This is Yitzchak Ruvain speaking to you from just east of Jerusalem. Yes, that was silence that you are listening to. We are not playing our usual introductory music because it's the 9 days. That is the first 9 days of the month of Av, which culminates on the 9th of Av, the fast day, commemorating the destruction of both the first and second holy temples, which actually this year will be observed on the 10th of Av, because this year the 9th of Av falls on Shabbat. And we do not fast on Shabbat. We do not mourn on Shabbat. So all the signs of mourning that we take upon ourselves throughout these past 3 weeks and in an intensified fashion throughout these 9 days, first 9 days of Av, we do not observe on Shabbat. It is Shabbat and all its joy and happiness and ease and comfort. But immediately after the conclusion of this coming Shabbat, the fast begins. And it is really a 25-hour fast because it begins just before, sometime before sunset, and concludes after the stars have come out in the evening of the next day. So this coming Motzei Shabbat, that is Saturday evening, begins the fast of the 9th of Av, which, as I just said, is actually going to be observed this year on the 10th of Av. I personally find it to be almost a little hint, a little reminder from HaShem when the 9th of Av falls on Shabbat. And it has a number of times over the past few years fallen on Shabbat, sort of a reminder that we're not going to be doing this forever. We will rebuild the Holy Temple, and the 9th of Av will become a day of joy, a day of celebration. But until that time, may it be soon, it remains a day of fasting and mourning. And what are we mourning? Well, yes, we're mourning the destruction of the first holy temple, the one built by King Solomon, which was destroyed on the 9th of Av by the Babylonians. And we're commemorating and mourning for the destruction of the second holy temple, which was built by the returnees from Babylon to Jerusalem, led by Nehemiah and Ezra and Nehemiah, who rebuilt the second holy temple. And it was destroyed in the year 70 CE, the year 70 of our common era, by the Romans. And but when the holy temple is rebuilt, it will be a time to celebrate. But we're not simply mourning, and this is very important. We shouldn't be mourning simply for something that happened thousands of years ago. Something that is something to definitely to think about and contemplate why the temples were destroyed. The first holy temple, they say, was destroyed because of idolatry. And the second holy temple was destroyed because of sinat hinam, which translates as pointless, baseless hatred among brethren. The Jews were at war with themselves, arguing, fighting amongst ourselves, which led to the destruction of the Holy Temple. To fight amongst ourselves is Hilul Hashem. It's a sacrilege. It's a defiling of Hashem's name. And this is what led to the destruction. And of course, to this day, there is too much infighting. There's too much division. We feel this very painfully here in Israel, especially now we're back in election time again, and that always seems to bring out the worst in terms of division. But we have to remember that even if we are on the exact opposite sides of the political spectrum, even if we are on the exact opposite sides of the spectrum of observing the mitzvot, the Torah commandments, or not, we're all one people. We're all brethren, and our strength comes in unity. And v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, we need to love our neighbor as ourselves, which reminds me again that today, the 5th of the month of Av, is the Yortzeit. It's the day of the passing of Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, otherwise known as the Ari, who is the great Kabbalist, 16th century Kabbalist who was born in Jerusalem. As a youth, his family moved to Egypt, and he grew up in Cairo. As a young man, he secluded himself in isolation along the banks of the Nile River for 7 years, studying the Zohar. And when he re-emerged from his isolation, self-imposed isolation, he took his family and moved to Jerusalem, and soon after to Tzfat, the northern Galilean city of Tzfat, which is a center of Kabbalah to this day. And he joined a number of Kabbalists who convened there, really. This was just some decades after the expulsion from Spain, which also took place on the 9th of Av. Another disaster for the Jewish people in our long history. On the 9th of Av, the very same day that Columbus set sail, the same day, same year that Columbus set sail and discovered the New World, discovered for the Europeans, I should say, the New World, that was the final day that the Jews could leave or be forcibly converted. And so some decades after, many of those Jews who had been expelled convened in the city of Tzfat, and it became a vibrant and hugely important center of Kabbalah and learning for a number of decades, until a plague ravaged the city, and then an earthquake destroyed the city and put an end to that renaissance, that short-lived renaissance here in the land of Israel. But anyway, and the Ari taught for 2 years in Tzfat, taught his Kabbalistic teaching, which revolutionized Kabbalah, revolutionized the way Jews today, how we understand everything about Torah, about creation, about the metaphysical worlds, just totally changed everything. I mentioned him now because it's his Yortzeit, it's his Hilula, another word for the day of his passing, and because he inserted into the Siddur, into the prayer book, into his Siddur, which was then copied out and really appears in almost every Siddur today, these few words, which are at the very beginning of the tefillah, of the prayer service in the morning, which is Harini makabel alai, behold, Harini, behold. I don't know if that's the best way to translate it. Behold, I accept upon myself the positive command of Ahavta l'reacha kamocha, to love your neighbor as yourself, because as the Ari taught, if we don't love one another, if we're not unified, our prayers aren't worth anything. They're not heard. They don't make it to heaven. They're not heard by HaShem. If we harbor any animosity toward one another in our hearts. So you got to clear all that out. You got to clear that out when you start each day. And love one another. And if love one another is the way that we should begin each day, then certainly it's the way that we should begin the rebuilding of the Holy Temple. And I personally believe that it's the actual commitment to and the unifying commitment to rebuilding the Holy Temple, which brings out the best in us, which brings out the unity in us, which brings out the love for one another in us. When we read all the verses, and there's so many verses in the book of Exodus about the construction, the actual construction of the tabernacle, you don't read anywhere of any kind of dispute, of any kind of anger, of any kind of conflict, either within the people of Israel or with their neighbors, because when they were unified in this task, answering Hashem's request, Asuli Mikdash, make for me a sanctuary that I can dwell amongst you. When they were involved in that, they were unified, and there was peace, and there was love, So that is the great elixir that awaits us when we unify around the commandments, which is a commandment for every generation, and that is to build the holy temple. So we're in the 9 days. We're coming up to the day, the 9th of Av, which again, as I said, will be observed on the 10th. And many, many, many Jews this year, as in previous years, will be going up to the Temple Mount, the place, the most appropriate place on earth to observe the 9th of Av, because that is the place where the destruction take place, and that is the place where we have the merit, the historical merit in our generation to go to and visit. Of course, we do so in accordance to halakha, first immersing in a mikveh, wearing non-leather shoes, and only entering into certain areas where it is allowed halachically to enter into. And perhaps thousands will arrive to go up. Hopefully they'll all get to go up. It all depends on how the police handle the situation. They're not really known for being the best at handling large numbers of people on the Temple Mount. But hopefully it will go smoothly. I anticipate, as with every year, that the Muslim Waqf has already begun trying to stir up trouble and to create a violent situation so that the police will say to the Jews, you can't go up, it's too much violence up there. They've done that in the past. For many years they succeeded in keeping the Jews off. The past few years they have not succeeded, by and large. And let's hope that the police, for once, think out of the box, think ahead of time, make preparations ahead of time, anticipate all this, and deal with it, and quell the violence before it even arises, so that the Jews can go up and observe the 9th of Av on the Temple Mount. I hope to go up. I know a lot of people personally that were planning to go up. And of course, if I get to go up, I will be sharing videos and photos and my impressions, as well as those of other people who have gone up, because many people will be posting photos and videos, etc. We'll be reporting on it. And that is the fast of the 9th of Av, this coming Sunday. The mount opens for Jews at 7:30 in the morning. That's when I hope to be there. And we'll close at 11 and open up again in the afternoon at 1:30 for 1 hour. Being that it's a fast day, I think most people will try to get up early in the morning rather than the middle of the day, because it's going to be blazing hot, I'm sure. But I hope to be there, and hopefully there will be many, many, many Jews there. So what is, I mentioned this idea of sinat chinam, this baseless hatred, and so people, the saying is that the way to rebuild the Holy Temple is with ahavat chinam, which you can translate as baseless love, but basically it means just being unified and loving one another in spite of all our differences and all our differences of opinion, just to love one another because we're all the children of Abraham, of Yitzchak, and of Yaakov. And that's beautiful. And that surely is part of the plan. But we can't just get there by it's sort of a shortcut. It's sort of it's sort of cutting corners. It's not really addressing the issue. This week's Parsha, this week's Torah reading, we begin the book of Devarim, of Deuteronomy this week, and thank God the Jews in the diaspora caught up last week, and so we're all Jews in Israel and Jews around the world are reading from the book of Devarim, Deuteronomy this week, and there's a reason for that, because this Parsha, Devarim, is always read on the Shabbat preceding the 9th of Av, and because it addresses very directly the sin of the spies, which of course, the sin of the spies occurred on the 9th of Av. That was the whole beginning of all this history of disaster, of calamity, because the spies came and delivered an evil report, and the children of Israel were seduced by this evil report about the land, and they rebelled, and they said, we're not going. We want to turn back and go to Egypt. And this angered HaShem to the extent that he said, none of you are going in. You're all going to die in the desert. And your children, who you claimed you were fearing for, we don't want to go in. Our children are going to be slaughtered. They're the ones, as adults, who will enter into the land. The question always arises, there are two major sins, two major screw-ups by Israel in the wilderness in those 40 years. And one, of course, was the golden calf, which resulted in the shattering of the 2 tablets of the law, resulted in internecine warfare, which took the lives of thousands of Israelites. But it ended with forgiveness. And if you read that episode carefully, it was Moshe who shattered the stones. It was Moshe who initiated the internecine warfare. It was Moshe who was fighting for Hashem's honor and for the sake of Israel, that they shouldn't be wiped out by Hashem. He took the situation into his hands and dealt with it, and Hashem forgave Israel, and Israel moved on. It's a stain, for sure. I'm not trying to diminish, but it was an error. It was a sin of, you could almost say, too much emunah, too much faith. The people believed in Hashem. They just didn't know how to express it. Moshe, they thought, was gone, and they panicked. And how do we express our devotion, our dedication, our attachment to Hashem? They came up with this idea of the golden calf, which they had just been told 40 days earlier was forbidden, but it was out of an expression of faith and love for Hashem. It was a horrific error, but that was the source of it. But here, the source of the spies was the exact opposite. It was lack of faith. And in this week's Parsha, I'm going to read the first few verses, and then we're going to go right into it. The first few verses go like this, first in Hebrew. אלה הדברים אשר דיבר משה אל כל ישראל בעבר הירדן במדבר בערבה מול סוף בין פרן ובין תופל בלבן וחצרות ודי זהב. These are the words that Moshe spoke to all Israel on the other side of the Jordan concerning the wilderness, concerning the Arava, opposite the Sea of Reeds, between Paran and Tofel and Lavan and Hatzerot and Di Zahav. So the interesting thing is that these places, places of names, they're really unknown. In last week's Parsha, or 2 weeks ago, or just last week, we read of the 42 places where Israel encamped in the wilderness. These aren't them. So what are these? So, of course, with this question, all our sages, didn't hesitate to come up with an answer. And one of those answers, really the consensus, is stated very, very beautifully by Rashi, the 11th century commentator, who says, since these words are of rebuke, these are words of rebuke. And the consensus is that much of the entire book of Devarim, Deuteronomy, which are Moshe's words, his address to the people of Israel in his final days of his life, they're all his words, his recap of everything that happened and his vision of what will happen, and his is trying to inculcate in Israel the faith and the determination needed to fulfill God's promise to inherit the land. Much of it is tochacha, which is the Hebrew word for rebuke or castigation or reproof. He is castigating the people. He's giving them heck. And it says that, Rashi says, and again, he's basically saying the words of the sages, that these name places or place names are hints of different sins committed by Israel in different places. And I'm not going to get into that right now because we are concerned with other things. But the point being that these names are sort of made up and they're sort of metaphors for, Dizahav, which has the word Zahav in it. This is the most obvious. Zahav is gold. So it's a hint of the sin of the golden calf. So Moshe didn't want to, overdo it and didn't want to really, come down into people and make them feel horrible, but he did want to remind them of the bad things that actually they hadn't done, but their elders had done, because this now is the younger generation. But he then goes on from here to starts to recap the history, talking about appointing judges, and then he comes to this. This in chapter 1, still in chapter 1, I think we're in verse 22, chapter 1, verse 22. And you all approached me and said, let us send men ahead of us so that they will search out the land for us and bring us back word by which route we shall go up and to which cities we shall come. And the matter pleased me, so I took 12 men from you, 1 man from each tribe. And of course, Moshe is reminding the people of the sin of the spies. How appropriate that we should be reading about this. This is why I said it's essential that this Parshat Devarim always is read on the eve, on the Shabbat before the 9th of Av. And because he talks about this sin. His version is a little bit different than what we read in the book of Numbers, where then it says that God said, send for yourselves spies, and that send for yourselves shalach lecha sort of implies that God was saying, if you want to. That's sort of an interpretation. God wasn't commanding it, but he was saying, if you feel there is value in doing that, then you have my blessing. Here Moshe says that the people approached him, and guess what? They approached him with a very proactive idea. Let's send out scouts, spies, so we can see, so we can plan our entry and conquest of the land. And Moshe agreed. The matter pleased me. And then, of course, quickly things go south, so to speak. And the people were discouraged. And Moshe, again, verse 29, he says, and I said to you, do not be broken or afraid of them. HaShem, your God, who goes before you, who will fight for you, just as he did for you in Egypt before your very eyes, and in the desert where you have seen how HaShem, your God, has carried you as a man carries his son, all the way that you have gone until you have come to this place. Now, all these words that Moshe is quoting that he himself said when 39 years earlier, when the spies returned, those words aren't recording in the account that we read in Numbers, but Moshe is saying it now in his recollection. And then he continues, but regarding this matter, you did not believe HaShem, your God, who goes before you on the way to search out a place for you in which to encamp, in fire by night to enable you to see in the way you should go, in a cloud by day. Again, if you recall, the sin of the spies took place shortly after we read about how beautifully the tribal encampments were set out in the desert surrounding the tabernacle, how the cloud would rise up, the sign it was time to move on, how the Levites would gather all the vessels of the tabernacle and carry them, and the entire encampment would move until the cloud, the glory of Hashem would descend again, and they know this is where to encamp. So the people, Moshe is saying, Hashem was taking care of you. He was like on top of it. He was there, and then you're saying you don't believe you can go into the land? In short, Moshe is accusing the people, and rightfully so, of lack of faith in Hashem. Lack of faith in Hashem. That is the sin of the spies. And guess what, dear listeners? That's the sin of a generation that hesitates and doesn't build the holy temple. Because do we believe in Hashem? Do we trust in Hashem? Do we have faith that this is what Hashem wants? So if we pursue it, it will happen, or do we not? It's the same sin. It's the same chet. It's the same lack of faith. One is the conquering and settling of the land of Israel, and the other is the building of the holy temple. And again, these are issues which contemporary Israel, as everybody knows, is dealing with these days. We have among us those who say, just like Caleb and Yoshua said, we can do it, we can settle it, we can conquer it. Hashem is with us, let's do it. Concerning the settling of the entire land of Israel, concerning the imposing of sovereignty over the entire land of Israel, concerning the building of the holy temple. And then we have others who say we can't do it. They're too strong, they're too dangerous, they're too scary. And there's another argument that enters in, and this one is perhaps the most dangerous of all the arguments. It's part of that. It's born of the lack of faith. Lack of faith leads to fear, and fear leads to justification. And right now, I want to go all the way to the very first verse in the entire Torah, in Bereshit, in the beginning. Bereshit bara Elokim, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And I want to quote Rashi from that very first pasuk in the beginning. And this is what Rashi says. He quotes Rabbi Yitzchak, who said, it was not necessary to begin the Torah except from this month is to you in the book of Exodus, right? This is the first of your months when Israel was still in Egypt about to leave. Israel as a nation gets its first commandment, its first mitzvah, to observe and declare the new month. That was the beginning of of Israel as a nation, and the beginning of Israel receiving commandments as a nation. So quite logically, Rabbi Yitzchak says, it should have begun there, the Torah. The Torah is not a history book. We don't need to begin with creation. It's very, chronologically it came first, but for the sake of the nation of Israel, the Torah doesn't need to start with creation. So he continues. It was not necessary to begin with the Torah except for this month is to you from Exodus 12:2, which is the first commandment that the Israelites were commanded. For the main purpose of the Torah is its commandments, and those several commandments are found in Genesis. For example, circumcision and prohibition of eating the thigh sinew. They could have been included with the other commandments. Now, for what reason did Hashem commence with in the beginning? Because of the verse. And here he goes on to quote a verse from Psalms. I'm just going to skip past that because, for if the nations of the world should say to Israel, listen carefully. This is really the heart of what he's saying. For if the nations of the world should say to Israel, you are robbers, you're thieves, for you conquered by force the lands of the 7 nations of Canaan. Okay, what is Israel accused of today? By everyone, by all the nations in the West, our friends, not to mention our enemies, that we're stealing the land, that we're conquerors, that we're invaders, that we're imperialists, that we're foreigners, that we don't belong here. And these concepts have infiltrated even the psyche of many Israelis, many Jews, who say, you know what, we really shouldn't be doing this. It really, the other side has rights. They were here. We can't do this. This is not right. It's not justice. It's not nice. And this is born out of doubt, out of a lack of faith. Because what does Rabbi Yitzchak continue to say? He says, for if the nations, I'm going to repeat again, for if the nations of the world should say to Israel, you are robbers, for you conquered by force the lands of the 7 nations of Canaan, they, Israel, will reply, the entire earth belongs to the Holy One, blessed be He. He created it. And this is what we learn from the story of creation. And he gave it to whomever he deemed proper when he wished. He gave it to them, those Canaanite nations. And when he wished, he took it away from them and gave it to us. Meaning, the land belongs to us. The land belongs to Israel. Why? Because God has decided to give it to Israel. Pure and simple. And what is that based on? How do we justify that thought? Faith in HaShem. You got to go all the way. You can't have, so it's like you can't be half pregnant. I say you can't be half faithful. You can't have some faith and not go all the way. Either you believe or you don't believe. Either you believe that HaShem created this earth and that HaShem decided that this land, this small land called Israel, this tiny little dot on the face of the earth, belongs to this tiny little people called Israel. Come hell or high water, it belongs to us or not. It either belongs to us or it doesn't. And guess what? Talk about, sinat chinam, talk about fights and divisions among the people. So much, I would say 99% of our disagreements here in Israel between fellow Jews has to do with these precise issues, whether the land belongs to us or not. There are people who say that having faith in Hashem, trusting that the land belongs to us and the Holy Temple needs to be rebuilt because Hashem has commanded us to do so, there are those who say, this is wrong. This is going to lead to our destruction. This is going to be the end of us. Where in reality, it's just the beginning. It's the beginning of us. But the thing is, having 70% faith and 30% doubt isn't enough. Because it's that doubt that eats away, it corrodes the people, it corrodes the unity, it corrodes the vision, and it just eats away at our strength. We need to have complete faith. I'm not talking about being fanatics. I'm not talking about being extremists. There's nothing extreme about having total faith in Hashem. Listen, we're people that's 4,000 years old. You know what? We've been through it all. Like, if we don't have faith in Hashem now, what are we waiting for? What's the point? What's the point of being around if we're not around for a purpose? And if that purpose isn't to fulfill the will of Hashem, who has kept us around for all these years. Hashem said, I'm bequeathing you this land. It's a gift from me. And the spies said, no thanks, we don't want it. Hashem doesn't accept that. It's one thing to err, to make a golden calf because we're scared, because we don't know how to connect, how to express our faith. It was an infant nation. But to say, no thanks, Hashem, we're not interested in your gifts. We're not interested in your vision. We're not interested in what you want for us, whether it's the land of Israel or what you want for yourself, which was to dwell amongst us. Asu li mikdash, make for me, right? The land is for us. The mikdash is for Hashem. This is mutual gift giving. Either we do it or we don't. And to do it, we need faith. Faith gives us strength. Doubt just destroys us. It destroys our unity. It destroys our avat hinam. It destroys our baseless love for one another. It destroys our vision. It eats away at our strength. We need faith. And that is the message that I want to leave you all with 5 days before we fast on the 10th of Av this year. I wish for everyone a very meaningful fast. Maybe it won't happen. Maybe we'll get it together before then and begin construction. A very meaningful fast, and please take these words to heart. Thank you so much for being with me. Temple Talk.